Good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight. The president announced plans today for tough steel tariffs, also tariffs on imported aluminum. Wall Street absolutely hated it. Markets tumbled in response, more than 400 points. But what does that mean? Does that mean that all trade deals are fair? The status quo should never change? In a minute, we'll talk to the top White House trade advisor about what their plan is and what it means for you. But first, the president's core supporters put up with a lot from day to day. We don't need to be specific about that. You know exactly what we're talking about, starting with the tweets. We won't go on. But the shortcomings of this administration are clear. They're usually worth it, though, for two reasons. First, the ideas the president ran on are basically right. America First ought to be the operating principle of every American administration. By definition, it's an American administration. America should be first. But that's not the motto of most administrations, not even hardly. Second, the alternatives to what we have now are scary and getting scarier. The Democratic Party is completely irresponsible and increasingly anti-American. They prefer illegal aliens to our middle class. That's true, and it's terrifying. And someone needs to defend the country from these people. Trump mostly does that. So for these reasons, most of the president's supporters have stuck by him no matter what has happened, and a lot has happened. But there's a limit to the tolerance. They will not tolerate, and they shouldn't have to tolerate, by the way, betrayal on the core promises of his campaign. And that seems to be happening on guns, unfortunately. A few days ago, the president called for raising the minimum age for buying a gun to 21. By the way, that's 4 years after we let people join the military. They can join at 17. But he's saying you can't buy a gun until you're 21. Now, nobody's even arguing this will save actual lives because there's no research that it will. It's propaganda, and it's sneaky propaganda, by the way. It's an incremental step toward more gun restrictions. That's all it is. And then yesterday, the president went even further than that. He met with lawmakers to talk gun control at the White House. At that meeting, he went after Republicans who want to defend the Second Amendment, suggesting they're puppets of the NRA. At one point, the president said the government should, quote, take the guns first, go through due process second. Now, I mean, how honest do you want to be? Imagine if Barack Obama had said that. Just ignore due process and start confiscating guns. Well, Obama would have been denounced as a dictator. We would have denounced him first, trust me. Congress should be talking impeachment right now. Someone would be muttering about secession. Well, the media agreed with what the president said yesterday, so they've underplayed it, or they presented it as just a little battle between the president and the NRA. But it's not about the NRA. It's not even about the president. It's about the Constitution, and the Constitution remains the same no matter who's in power. That's the point of the Constitution. The Second Amendment protects your rights to bear arms. It doesn't say that obliquely or metaphorically. It says it explicitly, and the Supreme Court several times has interpreted it that way, explicitly protecting your rights to bear arms. You can't lose that right, or any other right. The right to worship freely, the right to say what you want without due process, period. Those rights are what make us citizens and not mere subjects of the powerful. And the president needs to be reminded of that. Maybe we all do once in a while. If voters wanted that kind of government, they could have voted Democrat. And actually, they still have the chance to vote Democrat in the midterms, which he should keep in mind. Congressman Sean Duffy is a Republican who represents the state of Wisconsin. Congressman Jody Arrington is a Republican representing the state of Texas, and they join us both tonight. Congressman Arrington, to you first. I mean, if we just be honest for a second, because I think it puts it in stark relief, how would you have responded if President Obama said, well, we'll just take the guns and then we'll deal with the due process question?
I think more than disconcerting would be an understatement. We're talking about our God-given fundamental right to protect ourselves, not just against bad people, but against bad governments. Yeah. That's the context. And so, yeah, look, you mentioned a lot of things this president has done right. America First. He's strong on border security. He's strong on defense. And he's put a constitutionalist at the Supreme Court and has done a great job in that regard. But this one, he's going down that slippery slope, that knee-jerk reaction that we're accustomed to when you have these mass shootings. And I would oppose President Obama, and I would oppose President Trump and any president that negotiates away what is a fundamental right. And quite frankly, it's a right that if it were not exercised by our founding patriots, we wouldn't have the rest of our rights and we wouldn't have our independence. So this is a serious issue. So, Congressman Duffy, news coverage, 24-hour news coverage is basically just 24 hours of attacking Trump. And so we kind of pull back from that because we want to offer an alternative, agree with Trump on a lot. There's a lot else going on. We try to cover that. But I also think it's important to remember that nobody should be tied to a person, but instead to principles. And so with that in mind, do you think it's worth just reminding the president, as we all need to remind it sometime, that there are deeper principles here than just kind of winning the news cycle?
Well, right, there's deeper principles like the Constitution, but I've applauded the president for doing these open, riffs with whether it's the victims of the shooting or with politicians, whether it's on DACA or on guns. I think he gets high marks for that, but also I think he can say some things that he might, upon reflection, regret. And I hope this is one of the things that he actually does regret. And what frustrates me in this whole conversation, Tucker, is the fact that the left wants to put new gun restriction and new gun laws in place because they want to argue to the American people that that's going to keep us safer. I think you and I, based on your intro, and Jody would agree, those new laws don't actually keep us safer. I was a prosecutor for 10 years in northern Wisconsin in Ashland County, and if Nicholas Cruz had lived there, this shooting would have never happened because my cops would have seen the threats that had come in, the tips that had come in, the fact that they'd been called to his house, and when Nicholas Cruz threw his mom up against the wall, they would have arrested him, they would have thrown him in jail, they would have come to me and said, we're going to have a bond hearing, and we're going to have, as a condition of bond, the fact that he can't possess a firearm, and then we want you to prosecute him whether it's for a battery or a disorderly conduct with an enhancer that's a domestic enhancer. And in 1997, Bill Clinton signed a law that if you're convicted of a crime that's a domestic crime, you can't possess a firearm. We would have gone through that procedure, and Nicholas Cruz would have not possessed a firearm because we have good law enforcement and good prosecutors. I don't know what happened in Florida, but to add new laws on top of laws that already aren't enforced is idiotic.
Well, and especially because I think, Congressman Arrington, it doesn't address the actual failures that led to this tragedy in Parkland, Florida. Why are we not having a national conversation about why the sheriff's department, the FBI, the school, the deputies on the scene all failed to protect those kids?
Well, I think that's right. It was a failure to identify, register, and engage or respond. And there was failure at every level of government. Clearly there were some training issues at the local level with respect to active shooting. We need to bone up on that, but we also have to secure our schools and get serious about that and accept the reality that this is a fallen world and accept the reality that no matter how many laws we have in place, if somebody is hell-bent on murder and destruction, they will stop at nothing, certainly not respect for a gun-free zone to carry out their dark desires. So the last line of defense, Tucker, is to make sure that our people in our communities can defend themselves, their families, and yes, the students. That means that we need to do more of what Texas is doing, in my opinion, and make sure that last line of defense is that teachers and coaches and administrators are appropriately trained, licensed, and a part of that security apparatus.
To defend the school. So, Congressman Duffy, we could talk for hours about this. We don't have much time at all. But what's your best guess for why this is happening in the first place? What would drive a 19-year-old to want to murder strangers?
Well, listen, I think there's a whole bunch of issues that are taking place outside of guns, Tucker. I think our kids in America are angry. They're being raised in single-family homes without fathers. As a congressman, being away, I know that our boys specifically need fathers in the home. They're being over-medicated, which you've talked about. We say they have attention deficit disorder, so we medicate them instead of parent them. We have violence that comes from Hollywood. We dehumanize life in those video games and in those movies and with abortion. There's a whole slew of issues that we have in America that we didn't have 40 years ago. And we have to address the root cause of what's bringing kids to be so angry and so detached. Listen, cell phones, Tucker, these kids, they don't talk to each other anymore. They don't know how to interact with people. And because they're detached because of their phones and parents aren't engaging them to draw them away from the phone and into conversation, they're isolated. That's a hard conversation to have. It's easier to say, I have a political agenda to take away guns, and that's where the left goes at CNN, instead of going, let's talk about the root cause of the problem, which is how we're parenting and raising our kids. We've driven out faith and morality out of culture and family. That's all part of the problem here.
Of course it is, and you'll be mocked for saying that, but even the people mocking you on some level know that you're absolutely right. They know you're right, because you are. Thank you both, gentlemen. Congressman.
Thanks, Doctor.
Our next guest says all this talk about gun control, from CNN's totally Orwellian town hall to the president's remarks, pushed him to purchase his first gun. Robert Norman is a writer and a host of a podcast, and he joins us tonight. Mr. Norman, thanks for coming on.
Thank you for having me, Tucker.
So I wanted to talk to you, not because I thought your piece, I thought it was great, but not because it was unique, because I suspect it isn't unique. That's kind of the point. I think there are probably a bunch of people who had the same reaction that you did. Explain your impulse. Why did you do this?
Yeah, you're right. I mean, there aren't a lot of people who, there's a lot of people who reacted the same way, but my impulse when I wrote the piece was that I was seeing this argument go on and seeing the town hall, seeing everything happening on CNN, and the reactions both during it and after, no one was really talking about the issue from really a complex point of view. No one was admitting on either side that this isn't a simple issue. This isn't a simple problem. So when I hear people scream about, not even screaming, but even talking about saying safety is what's most important, and the other side saying liberty is what's most important, but neither one admitting that there are drawbacks, there are trade-offs that come with giving up liberty for security and giving up security for liberty. You're always going to have a trade-off. And so when I wrote the piece, I was writing it from that mindset of what would I rather have, what would I prefer, and what do I think is most important.
Boy, that's the most thoughtful gun purchase of the year. I would say. I mean, I agree with everything you just said. I just think more people than not act on instinct. But I think you've kind of explained what undergirds that instinct. Do you think you should be trusted with a gun?
I think so. It's interesting because I think that when it comes to the gun purchase, I didn't come from a point of view that I was actually excited to purchase a gun. I'm actually, as I read in my piece, I plan on training I plan on getting training. I plan on making sure that I take it as a responsibility because I view it as a duty. That's something that we don't really talk about, especially as civilians living in a country that's founded upon liberty, but it's a duty to carry it. And I definitely know that I don't plan on carrying it until I know that I can actually protect myself and protect others and not be a greater danger to others.
I think you speak for a lot of gun owners, and I mean there are people who have guns who shouldn't, probably a lot of them, but all the gun owners I know are very, very focused on safety and responsibility. So once you are trained, what do you plan to do with it?
I've thought about getting a concealed carry license. I've thought about potentially doing open carry. Really the key thing for me is just knowing that at the very least I should know how a gun functions, how to act around a gun, how to handle myself.
Yes.
I've actually gone through safety drills. When there's an open shooter drill, I've done those drills. I've been told and I learn and I understand that you run, you hide, and if all else fails, then you fight. But I think the same thing goes with guns. Is I don't view it as a necessarily in a light gift. I don't think it's
right.
Something...
No. The guns are heavy. There's a heavy burden attached. I wish we had a gun control advocate on right now with you to explain why, after everything you've said, you still shouldn't be allowed to have a gun. It would be interesting to hear their perspective on that. Robert, thank you for coming on. That was really interesting.
Thank you, Tucker.
A new letter to the Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, from Congressman Devin Nunes, the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, says that the FBI may have violated criminal statutes in its efforts to spy on the Trump campaign. The letter says that by using unverified evidence from the Trump dossier to justify surveillance of Carter Page, an American citizen who, by the way, graduated from the Naval Academy and was a naval intelligence officer, the FBI could have broken the law by doing that. In the letter, Nunes says, quote, "In this instance, it is clear that basic operating guidance was violated." He quotes FBI guidelines that state that all information used for a FISA court application be, quote, "thoroughly vetted and confirmed," which it looks like the information from the famous dossier was not, to put it mildly. We'll continue to follow this story. Well, lawmakers are trying to take away your right to a gun, but they are keen on enabling illegal immigrants to vote. We'll talk to a defender of Chicago's new ID cards, which are aimed at illegal immigrants. Stay tuned.